Queen PR, let me tell you something. There's a lot of things that I know, a little bit about. But when it comes to screw jobs in wrestling, especially that one that occurred in Montreal, I like to say I have a doctor's degree in that at this point.
I know all about the Montreal screw job.
Thank you. Which means we've been talking about Missing Voices as we get ready to talk about episode 3 of the Vince McMahon docuseries that Netflix did. Shout out to Ringer Films. I really wish Jim Cornette was in this episode.
Me too. I kind of wish he was in the entire thing.
Yes.
Just because he has such an unapologetic way of sharing wrestling history.
Mm-hmm.
And he has worked very closely with Vince McMahon over the years and has a deep wealth of knowledge of a lot of the twists and turns of the business. And I know there are stories about Vince that he has that if he was able to let loose on this doc, who knows what would have happened. But the screw job they go into, of course, because it sort of kicks off the whole Mr. McMahon character. So it is interesting that this is the third episode, the middle, before it goes into that second half of the documentary, because Vince's crossover into the Mr. McMahon character is a big part of who he is, or who we sort of think he is.
Mm-hmm.
And that blurred line between fiction and reality. But I love that they opened up this documentary with the women, because it was the first screw job.
Yes.
Way before the Montreal screw job happened between Wendy Richter and the fabulous Moolah, who was in disguise. And this was one of those situations where Vince McMahon was like, this is my championship. He very much looks at that as his. He owns it. He books it. He determines on whether or not you hold it. You are a character in his story. And if he doesn't want you to have this thing anymore, regardless of how you feel, then he will not have it. You will not have it. So he had to figure out a way to get this belt off of Wendy Richter, who he felt was getting a little ahead of herself. You hear her side. It's not really much that way. But we did get to hear from Wendy Richter as well. But you knew about the screw job, but how did you feel hearing Vince McMahon's take on it, and how he was like, I would have done whatever it took to get what I wanted in the end?
I mean, this is probably one of the few subjects where we have heard him talk extensively about from the documentaries, The Confidential. They made a storyline out of it. We all know the story when Shawn Michaels got saved, gave his life to God, and came back. One of the things he wanted to do was come clean about the Montreal screw job. So it wasn't nothing new. I was scrolling. I didn't stay on social media a lot today because when I would get on, I already started seeing quotes, and I got annoyed, to be honest with you. I'm like, sheesh, let it breathe for a couple days. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Like this quote, that quote. So, but I did see something where it's like, man, Brett kind of screwed himself. And I am still not going to go with that theory, especially when you have people like The Undertaker who'll say, Vince, why you ain't say something to me? I could have got that going because, and I feel like if anybody, Brett would have respected, because he respected The Undertaker as a locker room leader, but I mean, I was just happy that they did talk about the Wendy Richter, and I was happy that we got to hear her voice in it. But like you said, he really looks at it like it's his championship belt, and
he will do literally whatever it takes. There's nothing that he wouldn't do for their business.
Yeah.
Another aspect of that episode was the transition between the Golden Age with Hogan and Hulkamania, and transitioning to Bret Hart as his top guy. We saw he tried it with the Ultimate Warrior, Lex Luger, but with the steroid trial and things needing to be a little bit more realistic, Bret Hart was a safe choice for them to go with when it came to the future of the business, because he wasn't involved in scandal. He held the belt integrity, and he wasn't going to be out here, having sex scandals and stuff like that. He was going to uphold the business to the highest degree. And this was the fallout of the steroid trial. Um, Growing up, do you sort of remember when Hogan was fading out and Brett was becoming more of the star? And did you learn anything from hearing Vince talk about transitioning to Brett as the top guy?
Growing up, I will say it was weird for me because as I'm getting at the age where I'm more retaining wrestling from the day-to-day basis as opposed to the magazines and the toys, it was like give me as much Hulk Hogan as possible because now I can actually like remember it. I know how to use the VCR. I know
Mhm,
how to hit rewind. So I wasn't necessarily a like, all right, I'm tired of Hogan guy,
mhm,
but I was already in on Bret Hart because at that time I rooted for the good guys, whoever you told me to root for. So by the time we got to, I didn't like, and I feel like I know it didn't happen this way, but it always feels like I went over to my grandmother's house one day and sat in my uncle's room, and Ric Flair beats Macho Man for the title. Then the next day, Bret Hart beats Ric Flair for the title. That's how like my memory presents it.
mm,
I know it was some time for it, but it was like, okay, fine. This guy got the belt. I liked him in, the match with Davey and stuff.
mhm,
So the transition for me, I always will say that I felt robbed as an adult. Like I would have loved to see, we got to see a Roman Reigns versus John Cena when they were both good guys. And when John Cena was when Roman was the bad guy, we got to see, the matches like Hogan and Rock. I would have loved to see a Bret Hogan match in WWE,
mm.
both
Right.
babyface versus babyface. So, um, and I think just learning about it, I would have. I think I kind of would have wanted to see the King of the Ring incident addressed more, but I also get it.
Mm,
That wasn't necessarily Vince's story. If anything, you're just going to say Vince was
right.
Two Face. So I
Right.
think I can see why that was left on the cutting room floor.
Right. I agree. And it had to be done.
Mm,
It had to be done. Also, the crowd was behind Brett at that time.
hmm I thought you was
Brett
about to
doesn't.
say the screwdriver had to be done. I'm like, what? What
No,
you?
that's a whole nother episode. But I do. Um, I did like that Vince was unapologetic about it because it is what
hmm
it is. Like you screwed someone, and he doesn't act like he didn't. And he made sure that everyone involved was protected, and he sort of took the L for
Yeah.
doing what he felt like had to be done. It point blank period. And Brett, can we talk
Mhm.
about Bret Hart for a second? He always gonna be Brett, and that's what I love about him. He's gonna talk about how there was nobody better than him, there was nobody that wrestled better than him, but he got emotional. And it was hard because he talks about it a lot. I'm sure he doesn't want to fucking talk about that shit anymore. And he hasn't gotten emotional in a while talking about it, but here he did.
Mhm.
Because when you think about everything that he gave to Vince and the relationship that he had, he didn't hold back also in these episodes of calling Vince a liar,
Yeah.
saying that he screwed a lot of people and he just was not an honest person, and did
Mhm.
anything that he could to make sure that um you know everything that he wanted this business to be, it was going to be, and
Yep.
period. So speaking of just transitioning into this new era of what Vince's empire would become, was breaking kayfabe.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. So the first
I
two
miss
episodes
kayfabe.
we hear, I do too. We hear about the extent that Vince and his guys took to protect the business.
Mhm.
The smack heard around the world and all of these things. But now you have the realism aspect of it because these are not superheroes. They're not pretend. These are actually real humans. You have more dirt sheets. We'll get into Meltzer in these, but now fans are smarter now.
Mhm.
They kind of know some of the dealings and the contract negotiations and all these sorts of things. So the younger guys who are thinking about the future are like, do we really need to protect it as much as we've been protecting it? Like,
Right.
when Ted Turner started handing out these guaranteed contracts and poaching Vince McMahon's men, and we'll get into that. But the curtain call.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is one that I would like to dig into a little bit first, because you hear a lot of back and forth about whether or not Vince was okay with it.
Mhm.
I've heard numerous perspectives on this, and Vince basically is like, I guess I said it. I mean, maybe I said it was okay. Maybe I let it happen. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have. He left that very vague. Okay.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on this? Because this is a game changer.
I mean, I could see Vince, from what we know, him understanding how much that meant to Shawn Michaels.
Hmm.
Shawn Michaels is his top guy right now. Brett's away making movies and getting a much deserved break after 12 years of consistently being on the road. So I could see Vince saying, all right, Shawn, all right, you know what? Whatever. Because, Shawn Michaels had that reputation. And I remember being a Shawn Michaels fan at that time. That's my guy,
Hmm.
HBK. But I remember being a fan at that time and always thinking like everything he did was so cool, right?
Right.
But you really hear about him being a prick. But think about it. If he's the guy and he's the one drawing the money and he's got the kids doing the one to look cool, he's got the ladies, he got some leeway. So
Yeah.
I could see Vince saying, you know what? Go ahead, go do what you want to do. That's what love. So it doesn't surprise me. I think the biggest shock I got out of that one was I never really heard, and maybe he said it before on some wax, but I never really heard Triple H say kind of stand back, like stand up for himself, right?
Right.
Like Vince said, you got to eat shit, you're gonna like the taste of it. But I never really heard Triple H say, well, Vince, look what was the biggest pop of the night.
Hmm.
So that stood out to me.
That piece that Triple H said also kind of got me, because I haven't heard him say that before either, or
So
just
I'm
in
not crazy
general.
because I know you
No,
do
you're not
extensive
crazy.
research.
And no, you're not crazy, because I do. I don't feel like he said that before.
Hmm.
But you also get into some of the surprises that happen in wrestling, like the Lex Luger showing up on Nitro and
Yes.
really, getting real
Yeah.
in the business. So let's get into the start of the Monday Night War, because this is
Mm-hmm.
when we get into it. And a lot of people think that the Montreal Screwjob was sort of the turning point, uh, because it just was unheard of at the time,
Right.
and we knew that Bret Hart's contract was ending and he couldn't afford to pay him anymore. We knew a little bit more. Now we know that Scott Hall and all of them, they're the clique, and they're not really enemies, like, and that's okay that we kind of break that. But Ted Turner now wants to go into the wrestling business, and now we enter Eric Bischoff into the chat, and now he's poaching Vince's talent. And we wanted to kind of talk about how Ted Turner was now sort of seeking revenge on Vince, and how this kicked off the Monday Night War. We've done a lot on the Monday Night War, but what were some of the things that surprised you that Vince talked about when it came to
um, a lot of finally hearing Vince kind of saying he wanted Lex Luger to step up.
that?
You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Because we never hear that from him. Uh, you know the part when he said like Brett had enough charisma, and to me, I'm always like, what do y'all mean? Because to me, Brett had charisma. Brett
Right.
was the guy, so that was interesting. But also just with the fact, like seeing how annoyed and how it really affected him that Hogan went over there, and really feel and Shane McMahon saying like he still kind of has a little, it's still bothers him to this day that Hogan went over there. And then also like with Eric Bischoff said Vince ego won't let him think it was Eric Bischoff that kicked my ass. It was Ted Turner that kicked
Yeah.
my ass. So I love that part of when you talk about this whole Monday Night Wars.
I didn't even peep that too, and it also goes to Eric Bischoff's motivations as well, where it's like, you're gonna notice me, Like we're in
Yep.
competition just as like I am the one that beat you
Mhm.
for 83 weeks. I'm the one. Like I had Ted's checkbook, but again, this goes back to Vince curating his image because when WCW started to become like real competition, now Vince is like babyface, like this billionaire is coming for this mom and pop, grassroots organization, and we can't
Yes.
compete, and it's so, and it's like, okay, Vince. So by this time you're already like a millionaire, But again, blurring those lines between fiction and reality, but also it's rooted in some reality. But WCW was kicking their ass, and Ted Turner definitely was like, I'm gonna show you, Vince." And Vince
Yep.
made sure to bring up some of the stuff that Ted, or some of the shit that Ted was talking. Vince
Mhm.
definitely brings it up in this series of like, yeah, remember, when you said this, like, yeah, I don't think that's what happened. I think we was the ones that kind of kicked your ass. But um, just the start of that war and hearing that perspective was really cool.
Yeah, because like I said, we've done a lot of research on the Monday Night War, and I
Mhm.
love that WWE have broken it down from every aspect of it, from the cruiserweights to the women to
Mhm.
the Austin Rock, top guys, mid card guys, but hearing like kind of like the big bosses go at it, and that was the
Right.
interesting part.
It was, and now I think is a good time to bring up some of the USA Network executives that were in this
Mm-hmm.
series that I've never heard from, and they were two women.
Yes.
And I really want to make sure that,
Yeah, you had
um,
Kay
yes, their
Koblovitz.
names, yes,
Yeah, Kay Koblovitz. She was one, and I have the lady's name down because I wrote it down, and that's what we do because she was very, very prominent in
she
this.
was, and they were able to talk about the change in the product and the competition with Ted Turner and um working with Vince and how the network was affected by the scandals and the
Hmm.
screw jobs and the change in how he was perceived just as much as WWF was because it was
Yeah.
a ratings driver for the network. So they were going to do whatever they could to protect it, but they also sometimes had to check Vince and be like, yo, like, this isn't working. Like, this is, kind of crazy, but also keep up that working relationship. So this episode really did a good job of showing the relationship that the wrestling business has with the TV business.
Yeah, it's like that's still our boy,
Right,
you
right.
know.
Friendly competition.
Yeah, and Bonnie Hammer was the other one,
Nice. I love
far
her.
as she was the VP of original programming. So
Mm,
and these ladies spent like they had equity. They wasn't just
right,
they were there
right.
for years, and I really love like they was throughout the doc, especially talking about the relationships. Like you heard them talk about the relationship with Shane and stuff, and the family dynamics.
Mm.
So I was happy, but that was something new. Understanding USA was like nah,
Like we can't.
because
We're
I
not
mean
gonna
it
do
was
this.
it was bad though. Like I really remember we ordered Royal Rumble 96 and watching all that stuff, the Nacho Man and all that. Like, yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, it was so bad. And it was one thing because it was like, okay, we're not going to sell. Like Vince
Hmm.
talked about in the doc how he was the king of no selling. Like he was not going to show vulnerability. He was not going to show that he was affected by the competition. But then at the same time, you have these vignettes making fun of Ted Turner and WCW, and that's when the USA executives were like, "Yeah, we don't like where this is going, so
Right.
we're not gonna do that." But when it came to just the screw job, I think this episode really laid in that Vince was going to do whatever it took to make sure that he was successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Period.
And that's the best way to put it. You know what I mean? Because if it took a screw job, it took a screw job.
Exactly. And that was that. And then it also makes you think about Eric Bischoff's take on the competition as well, because that's what really was making Vince crack, was the fact that Eric Bischoff was willing to also do whatever it took to make WCW more successful than the WWF at the time. Like, he was willing to do whatever it took, and it drove Vince crazy. But I do like how he never was like, I'm beefing with Eric
And
Bischoff.
that's why
I'm
he hired
beefing
him.
with Ted Turner.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Twice. We got to say twice.
Twice.
I'm back. And I'm better than ever. Yo, that night, shocking. Like, and you know what?
So.
I want to say that was the night. I don't think I was I was getting ready to go to like watch, and somebody called me. You won't believe who's on Raw. I'm like, Eric Bishop. And it was kind of like, remember the Booker T reaction? That's infamous.
Did not just see that.
Oh man, but episode 3 is good. You know what? I can't wait to go back and rewatch these.
I know. I'm glad we got to do this live reaction to it. But this is halfway through the series. This is when we are about to get into the Attitude Era, and the most popular time in wrestling, and probably a crazy time for Vince as well. But this is where we see the birth of Mr. McMahon, and we really get into, I think, the Vince McMahon that we all kind of know or think that we know, because now in the next episodes, he becomes an off-screen character. We get to meet his family. We get to see exactly where he is in the business now, like on TV now. Like, he's not just like, a commentator or a host. Like, now we see like he is the billion-dollar owner. He's owning up to it. Brett screwed Brett. This is when we really get into the nitty-gritty. And then also, where does Vince fit in this? How close is he to the Mr. McMahon character at this point? So I can't wait to dive into episode 4, which is called Attitude. And make sure you check out our previous episode recaps of Mr. McMahon docuseries on Netflix. And we want to know what you think. So drop your opinions in the comments, and we will see you in the next episode.